Hi, welcome to Connecting the Dots, the podcast where we share our stories from the battlefield of consulting. I'm your host, Johnny Hill.
I'm Leslie Mitchell.
I'm Pamela Crozier.
I'm Valen Reynolds.
Hey, I'm Kareem Jamal.
Today we're talking all about how to make sure your meetings are meaningful and beneficial to your entire team, and what to do if they aren't. Let's get started. So to start off, let's just talk about why do we even have meetings? Like there's a place for them, obviously. Like meetings need to happen at some points, but why? Why do we do meetings?
Well, obviously, there's a few key reasons to have meetings, but to gather information, I think, is the most important thing that we talk about when we discuss having meetings, and then, conveying information, creating information, a lot of what we've talked about previously. I think definitely the type of company we are, a consulting company, there's so many different types of meetings that you can also feel like your days are compromised of complete meetings from, we have a lot of developers and engineers, they're in stand-ups all day and sales meetings, and then, project kickoffs and discoveries. We have, the whole gambit of meetings that we go through.
Yeah, I think that's worth noting. Like there are different kinds of meetings for different purposes. Sometimes it's just a quick 2-minute, hey, can we get on the same page? I don't think this is going to be as smooth as, maybe if you're trying to talk over text, it's just not, there's something lost in translation or, nuance that's missed. And it's like, hey, we just jump on a quick phone call and gather. I think that qualifies as a type of meeting. And then there are obviously the more structured, longer form meetings for, getting on the same page about a larger effort or planning for something or gathering requirements or whatever it may be. So when we say meetings, it could be a whole number of different formats, but I think the general way we're defining it is 2 or more people gathering together to talk about something specific.
I think one thing that's interesting is sometimes meetings are necessary just purely out of logistics. Mm-hmm. A meeting can be the only time that you have an opportunity to speak with a particular stakeholder, be it at the client or internal. And so sometimes the purpose of the meeting takes on a whole bunch of different things because you only have a half hour to speak to this person every 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And that with that half hour, Valen, I think is important that you need to know what information needs to be conveyed or gathered in that half an hour.
Yeah. That's where I think it gets interesting is why are meetings necessary? Well, sometimes they're necessary because it's the only form of communication for certain folks.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Paul Graham wrote an article years back, and it's an oversimplification, but it's basically the makers and managers schedule. A similar dichotomy is, are you a decider or a doer? Right. And then some people collapse that up to executives and minions. It's not that simple, and everyone wears all those hats. But it is interesting to kind of see, and when you think about a meeting, like, well, what's the purpose? Am I trying to get a maker to do something and have their information, or am I trying to get a manager to steer the ship and make a decision, and all of the things in between?
And to continue what Valen was saying, like it might be the only time you have with that executive or that decision maker, right? And if you didn't have that meeting, not only would you not get that time, but they wouldn't be top of mind, right? Because if you were just emails, you would continue dropping lower. And so in order to keep you sort of relevant and top of mind, so you get your answers and they're thinking about whatever you're working on, that sort of helps keep you towards the top, right? Without sinking lower in the email pile.
That's also one of the challenges we come across with a lot of our clients and stakeholders is if we're using this concept of it's the only time we can talk to this person, the motivation becomes, well, let me line up all of the things that I need to discuss with this person. I need to convey some information to them. I need to gather their opinions. We need to create something like a roadmap, and we need to make some key decisions. That's overload. That's too much.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that in my mind always permeates a successful meeting is that the agenda, that the purpose, why you think it's necessary, is actually very constrained and almost single-minded.
Because it's coming from the person that's setting up the meeting, right? If you're working together to create an agenda for those specific meetings, I think you'll have a better outcome.
Yes, but there's also a consideration that, I mean, sometimes you hold a meeting, and I keep going back to that time block meeting example, but with a lot of client stakeholders, right? You meet with them and you come up with an agenda.
Mhm.
The meeting is the first time you're communicating with that person. They give you a time block. They're not actually working with you to create the agenda all the time.
Mm.
And so you sometimes think, I want to throw in a bunch of stuff, but if you put yourself in the shoes of that person, it can lead you to actually have a more successful meeting because you constrain things quite a bit and you look at it from their perspective, and they're not going to be able to often shift focus as fast as say you have been. As you're writing the meeting agenda, you're thinking about all of this, you're pre-organizing it ahead of time. They're kind of coming in blank slate.
It's kind of funny. It makes me think we've talked before about estimation and what it looks like to estimate effort, but I think there's another element of planning for a meeting that requires estimation. How long will it take to determine, the decision we need to make about this technology or this approach or this feature or whatever it may be, and estimating, okay, 30 minutes is not enough time to iron this out. But what are one or two things that are high priority that we can do in that time? And then, maybe we can find a larger block later for the stuff that we can't fit in that conversation.
And also keeping in mind when you're looking at projects from start to finish or larger programs of making sure that you're estimating meetings as part of your overall project, that you're not leaving those out.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good point. A lot of time can be spent in meetings, sometimes well spent and sometimes poorly spent time. But yeah, factoring that in, how often are we going to have to meet to get on the same page about this? That can definitely blow the budget in some situations if you're not careful.
Yeah, I mean, after a while, continuous meetings, you just run out of steam.
Mhm.
Get it? You said iron out stuff, steam.
Thank you, Kareem.
But you also have to sort of prioritize your meetings. So it's your sort of meeting agenda for your meetings, right? So if there are key decisions you need, then make sure those are at times that the person you're talking to is not tired out, because otherwise you won't get the decisions and answers you're looking to obtain, right? Then their mental processing power will have run out. And they'll be like, okay, let me get back to you. And now you have to wait, another 2 weeks or whatever until you get a chance to talk to this person again.
Yeah, I think that's part of planning meetings well, like going about how to make sure your meetings actually count for something is if you have visibility into the person you're meeting with's calendar, not finding the 30-minute block between, there's 4 meetings before your block and 4 meetings after. When it's just back to back to back to back to back and you're somewhere in the mix, you're probably going to get stuff lost in the shuffle, especially if there's like important to-dos coming out of it, or if there's important questions that you need answered. Trying to squeeze as many meetings as you can into a small amount of time. The person who you're meeting with is probably exhausted, and they're probably also not going to be able to take action on the things you discussed in the meeting very well if they have to run off to another meeting. And that's ignoring the fact that meetings often run long, or someone comes late because they haven't had a chance to eat lunch yet, whatever it may be. So yeah, I think being considerate of the people you are trying to meet with and their calendars and their schedules, so that you're not just trying to shove something in to their last open slot in the day, and then it ends up just being a wash anyway because they're so worn out.
Yeah, I think starting and ending meetings on time is a big part of whether or not they're successful, because if you're
Mhm.
sitting around waiting for one person because another meeting was late,
Mhm.
it's going to make your meeting late, or you're going to lose time to make that decision.
Right.
We actually at a place I worked before, this was before everything was remote, but the meeting spaces would not allow you to block till the half hour or the hour. Everything had to end 5 minutes before.
Mhm.
So if you blocked it for an hour, you blocked it for 55 minutes to allow, I mean, this feels like a different time, but it allowed people to leave a space and walk to the next meeting room,
Mhm.
and for that, that flow of people to happen. And I think it's still relevant in a remote world. It's for time for people to grab a drink of water, or, do whatever they need to do in between meetings, process what they just talked about, or prepare for the next one.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even, respond to those messages that I got while I was in the meeting and I was ignoring because I was trying to be present.
Right.
Well, we've already kind of gotten into this some, but let's kind of keep going on the thread of how do you make sure your meetings are actually worthwhile? And what can you do as an active planner of a meeting or as more of a passive just participant to make sure that the meetings that you're a part of are successful and meaningful and count for something?
I mean, Balin and I have talked about this endlessly. Why are we having meetings? What are the right meetings? But I think making sure you have the agenda, even if it's, 2 bullet points that you need to cover, and then
Mhm.
making sure you have the right people and the right decision makers. Because if you don't have those key people that can make the decision, you're just going to say, well, I'll follow up with a meeting tomorrow with so and so, or let me get the answer and then come back and we can meet again. Those two for me is making sure you have the right people and making sure you have the agenda and actually the outcome that you need.
I also think there's an element of recognizing that we are human and social creatures. And so, one purpose of a meeting is just, quite frankly, to talk. You have to get together. You have to just build these normal relationships so that you can work as two people on a common goal. But I also want to mention on the decision front, there's a concept in many organizations like an architecture review, where you have to have your application reviewed by this committee. Is it secure? Is it sound? Is it designed well? And if the decision is still open when you present to that architecture group, you already failed because the decision is made before that meeting. The meeting is just a presentation of the decision that was already made. That holds true for a lot of stakeholders. So the decision there needs to be pre-meetings. There needs to be discussion beforehand, a lot of one-on-one meetings, because if you have a key stakeholder in a group and you say, here's all the information, I need a decision A, B, or C, you're not going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I mean, and if you put yourself in the shoes of that person, well, that's fair. They've never heard about it. They haven't thought about it or obsessed about it. They don't know all of the threads. All they know is what was recommended.
I think meetings are also important in these key decision type meetings to capture the tone, right? That is something that your emails or other async communication won't capture. So if you ask a sensitive question over email and the reply is, yeah, okay, then does that mean, yeah, okay, affirmative, or yeah, okay, with eyes rolling? And so it's hard to decipher that sometimes, right? Because if the question is of that nature, then you don't really know what they're thinking. So again, there's other hidden information behind some of these decisions or statements that may need to be captured. And so you need to plan it accordingly.
Yeah, and I also think there's a whole other element of things where, maybe if you're not actively leading a meeting, being as present as you can be as a participant, I think is also a big part of helping to create a successful environment for that meeting to be in. So if I'm constantly on my phone or checking Slack or sending messages or whatever it is, it's not only distracting me and I'm not paying full attention, but it's probably distracting others. So kind of helping to set the tone in the meetings that you are in, I think can really be helpful. It helps the person who is trying to run the meeting when you're not distracted, but it also helps you get out of it what you're supposed to be getting out of it, like why you're even there in the first place.
Well, I think that's part of the problem in a heavy meeting culture because you're going from one to another, and people don't have that time, like Leslie was talking about, they don't have that buffer. And so it's constantly, I'm trying to pay attention to a meeting. I'm looking at my Slack because someone needs an answer. Oh, there's a it's just a constant state of distraction. So if we can be mindful, and we've talked a lot previously, not here today, but even having those like meeting free Wednesdays or blocking out time for people to actually do work and not meet and have those protected times. It's not, there's a few of us that might do focus time on our calendars where it will automatically decline a meeting. I think that's really important to give makers and even managers time to sit down and actually, get work done outside of meetings so that they can meet and say what they got done.
That ties back to the estimation that Johnny brought up earlier. And I think if you overlay the estimation with the folks in the room and what their roles are, you see that the estimation is very different amongst people. So a manager is fine. I've got a slot, book it up, because the meeting is the work. Again, that's an oversimplification.
Right.
But it does hold true for certain folks where the meeting is the work. There's a whole nother class of folks where the meeting blocks work. And so if you can be mindful of that and you can see who's involved, what they want to get out of it, and then what they can contribute. It's very hard to get out of the headspace of, I have a meeting, here's what I need to get done out of this meeting, and I need these 10 people, and they all are feeding into me. It's never that simple.
And there's like a little area in between where like the meetings force work, right? So oftentimes meetings are used as forcing functions. For example, stand-ups, right? They are not async. It is definitely sync. It is scheduled, and you have to attend that. And what that does is it forces everyone to go update their statuses, right? Whereas if it was sort of async updates, you might not get that forcing, or if sometimes decisions aren't being made, then having something on the calendar that has a set time that you're working from, that sort of forces you to back up and say, what do I need to have ready by then? And so it forces you to prioritize and move things up in your queue to get them done.
But you could also force, when we talk about everyone has so many meetings, and again, we've talked about this, but you say everybody has so many meetings, but then there's people that have 4 stand-ups. Why not have 2 of those a week be the asynchronous updates, or 3 of those be async, or a Slack update does it? Give me your status update. You get that Slack notification and then it's done. And unless there's a blocker or something that needs to be discussed, that's when you have your meeting. I think so many of us get in the habit of like stand up, stand up, stand up, that's another distraction, but maybe that's not everybody needs to be on the stand up. So there's, I mean, we all have a lot of conversations on how to reduce meetings or make shorter meetings, but I think that if we take a step back and really look at those day-to-day meetings, then maybe there can be changes made there.
Actually, on a lot of the projects that I'm on, when I'm setting up the schedule for stand-ups, just don't schedule meetings on Fridays.
Right.
I just
That's-
skip it, and then everybody's happy because
It's a
you know,
really good habit. I think
Yeah.
that we do a lot of that on my projects too, and it makes everybody happier.
and you still
there-
communicate what you need to communicate. There's
Mhm.
nothing really lost by having one day without a stand-up. And actually, you could argue that things are gained because people have more time in other ways, whether that's to focus on their work or to spend time with coworkers in a different way.
Yeah, let's keep going with that a little bit because I know, we obviously have talked a good amount about how to have a meaningful meeting, what that looks like, but let's talk a little bit about, meeting fatigue is a very real thing, and trying to protect people's calendars from being in back-to-back meetings all day, every day. Like, what are some of the actionable things that you can do to make meetings be less of a burden, or even just how can you ask yourself, is this even necessary? Like, when do we need to have meetings, or when is it, oh, this could have been an email? How can we like be more proactive in that way?
I mean, I think if you look, and I know there's other opinions here as well, but I think if we look at the calendar, for example, we just spent, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, we looked at the calendar and said, what meetings could we consolidate? And while they made it longer, there's one meeting that we had across a couple of days, and we made it onto one day because it was all the same people in this meeting. And now it's a little bit longer, but I bet in 2 weeks it might be shorter and shorter because we've gotten more efficient at it and we're getting the information we need easier on that one meeting. So simple things like that is what we're doing right now, is looking at what meetings we can consolidate, what information we need to get from those, and can that change be made?
One thing that can be useful with meetings, especially when it comes to conveying or deciding, right? When you're trying to get someone to make a decision, or you're sending key information, ping the stakeholders before the meeting. Did you have a chance to read X? If not, postpone the meeting.
Yeah, I was gonna say something very similar to that. And like, if you're having frequent meetings and the outcome of those meetings are not helpful, and you find you're having to follow up or send emails or Slacks or something, then that's an indication that the meeting is not helpful. So you either need to change how the meeting is run, or maybe make it less frequent, or change who's in attendance. But it's a good sign of change needed.
I've hacked that purposely sometimes, where at the last minute, oh, I'm not available for 15 minutes. Let's meet at this time. And so that forces certain stakeholders to actually, oh, well, I'm at the meeting, I've joined. They'll read the agenda, they'll read the information before, especially when it comes to, folks where it's hard to get people's time. and that can help focus the meeting and then help reduce the meeting fatigue because it actually leads to a good outcome.
Mhm.
Well, so now every time Balin tells me he's going to be 15 minutes late, I should make sure to read the agenda. You've given your hack away.
Yeah, it's
Are you saying you don't
it-
normally read the agenda, Pam?
I always read the agenda because
Yeah.
they're always
No,
mine.
I was gonna say that another way to do that, I mean, it depends on who's on the call with you, right? But
Yeah.
another way to do that is to simply say, hey, let's take a couple of minutes before we start and everybody read the agenda. If you have questions, let's ask now. It's sort of another forced participation, forced
Mhm.
family fun, if you will.
And then that gives you a chance to go refill your iced coffee or what have you.
I think there's also an element of recognizing like we kind of talked about this already, but who is on the meeting? How many people are on the meeting? If you have, you know, stand-ups every day with 35 people, that's not going to be a very productive meeting. That's just too many people. And also like that creates a dynamic where if something's wrong, you know, there may be some timidity to bring that up in front of such a large group. So it might be the case where, okay, we need to break this out into a smaller group. The dynamic at play when you have too many people on a meeting can really affect if you even can get anything done or if people feel comfortable communicating what they need to.
Yeah, that's not a stand-up. That's an all hands.
Right.
That
Yeah.
said, I have been on client meetings where there are that many people in a meeting, and it's just no one's going to speak up when you have that many people. There's not going to be the change of ideas and collaboration that you're looking for in those types of meetings.
Mhm.
So it doesn't serve its purpose.
I mean, that's often the fear of missing out, right?
Mhm.
Everybody wants to be included because everybody feels that they have something to contribute when often on those large meetings, it's 5 people doing all the talking.
Maybe it's the fear of meetings out. It's a different
Ooh.
type of FOMO.
Set that one
I
up for
think-
you, Kareem.
One thing though, that to help with the FOMO or to reduce the meeting attendee size is using technology wisely. Because now we have these different ways to get the meeting summaries, which aren't perfect. But we have different ways we record the meetings at a minimum. People can go watch it afterwards. If they're people that don't need to speak, they just want to know the information, they can watch it later. There are other ways to use AI depending on access and privacy, but other ways that you can do that to get the summary of the meetings to the people who need it without having 30 people on an hour-long call.
So what are some other practical ways that we can help cut down on unnecessary meetings? I know, you know, everyone's experienced the meeting that could have been an email or, you know, was unnecessary to have this much time blocked for this topic. Maybe it was a little too focused for the amount of time or the number of people you've had on it. What are some ways that you can practically help to cut down on unnecessary meetings or maybe help to, you know, promote that among your work culture, among your colleagues?
Work one-on-one, have multiple one-on-one meetings with your stakeholders and become the conduit of information. And then have a meeting or a summary of it. That to me has been the most helpful. And it's counterintuitive, right? Because we have
Mhm.
meetings with 6 people because, quote, it's the most efficient way to get to consensus. But it really isn't. It's actually more efficient to go meet with all those folks one at a time and bounce their ideas off of each other. It takes a lot of time of one individual as opposed to a medium amount of time for everyone involved. But that is challenging,
it's-
time consuming for that key person.
Right. And I think that's a very specific outcome that you're trying to get when you're meeting at that level one-on-one when you need those key decisions. But there's also just like the informal check-ins and those type of meetings
Yeah.
that we have. I think it's just such a different way of looking at it because I think not everyone can drive those one-on-one conversations to
That's
get
a
to
good
the
point.
outcome.
Like recognizing, is the work product the collaboration itself,
Right.
or is the work product the assimilation of everyone's knowledge and opinion into a collective? And those are two distinct
Mhm.
things, right? To your point, yeah.
For meeting fatigue, you can be proactive. And if you see your calendar start to fill up, you can go block some spots in there, right? With like focus time
Yeah.
or out of office or something to make sure that you get that breathing time in between so you can refresh, summarize, and write down the follow-ups and ideas from the previous meetings before you forget, and then prepare to be respectful of the next meetings that are now coming up on your calendar, right? So you have to be a little proactive there based on the patterns and time slots that are being filled up on your calendar.
And lurk on other people's calendar for
Mhm.
the same thing. Don't schedule a meeting after everyone in your meeting was in a 4-hour,
I think
key
that is
meeting or something like that.
that's really important, is paying attention to other people's time, because I know that people try to schedule 6 people and then you find a half an hour in between 6 other meetings, and that's becomes that distracted participant because they're trying to catch up. It's being respectful of people's calendars. And I love the, no stand up Fridays. I think that's a really great way to give people that breathing room, but just being respectful of the times. Just because someone doesn't have something on their calendar at lunch doesn't mean you can take that hour.
I think for me, there's two aspects of this. One is just self time management, right? Say no.
Right.
It's not just block your calendar, because people are going to schedule it anyway. Just say,
Right.
no, I'm not available. I've done that before. And I say, if you need a decision in the moment, let me know. I'll try to join, but otherwise I have to do something else. But I think it also matters who you're talking about when you're talking about respecting their calendars, because we work with developers, right?
Right.
And they might want a block of meetings so that they're not doing context switching all day. You don't want to give them an hour break in between. They might want to have 2 or 3 meetings back to back so that they can go into the zone,
Be
right?
done.
So they can
Mhm.
focus. The people on this call are probably in calls more than a lot of people at our company, right? Our developers are in, if they're not a lead, they're in 1 or 2 calls a day max. So respecting their time and their calendars is a different approach than respecting someone who's in meetings all day.
Mhm.
So you have to
Yeah.
kind of have that nuance
That's a
as
good
well.
point.
Yeah, it does matter who's there. For me, the meeting fatigue comes about exactly that example. I'm more like a developer. I don't necessarily get meeting fatigue by having 4 meetings in a row. The reason I have meeting fatigue and I get overwhelmed sometimes is the meeting isn't over when the time ends, because I have a half hour of tasks afterward. The meeting fatigue comes in because I'm in the next meeting, but I still have to hold all of those concepts in my head from the previous meeting.
Yeah.
And then maybe 3 meetings before that, unless you have time to write it down and digest it and then finalize it. That lurking little demon is that meetings extend far past the time.
Holding on to those thoughts so that you don't forget all day also eats up at your mental capacity, right? So you're
Yeah.
actually getting more tired because it's holding on to it until you can act on it.
That's one of those things that I've started to take too for certain folks. It depends on, again, what the meeting is and what your goal is, but have a quick sync with someone for 5 minutes. And the purpose of that meeting is to evaluate, we need to talk about X. When is a good time for you to focus on X? Is it later today? Is it tomorrow? Is it in 3 weeks? What do you need in order to be able to focus on it? Those quick little pickup meetings I've found actually help some of those other, more focused and contentious meetings, because it allows them to start pre-thinking about stuff.
And maybe just if there are stand-ups, maybe just ask the people, like, are these valuable? Or what do we want to change, right? Sometimes just get direct answers. Are these meetings necessary and valuable to everyone and all the attendees?
I mean, and sometimes stand-ups take longer to log into the Zoom than the stand-up actually takes. So, great, it's really efficient because we can go through the board and it's really quick. But at the other time, if people just say nothing today, then that's when you say, let's move it to Slack and maybe meet twice a week in person, like taking that temperature per project.
This is why I really like Microsoft Teams, is by the time you finally log in and have
Oh, yeah.
rebooted 3 times and everything, the stand-up is over, so you're free.
That's a key thing to recognize on certain classes of meetings is, are we meeting because of the ritual?
Yes.
Or are we meeting to get to an outcome? And a stand-up is a great one that we could have an entire podcast around, Agile and Scrum dogma and all sorts of things. But stand-up serve multiple purposes. Sometimes the stand-up is to raise issues that need to be addressed because you're moving so quickly. If you wait a day to address them, you're going to have bigger problems. Other times a stand-up is just to get the team together because they're in different time zones and they never get to communicate. And there's the social aspect of the stand-up.
Right.
And then sometimes it actually is communication of status, right? It could have been an email, but the way this team operates is verbal for other reasons. And I found with stand-up specifically, not having an agreement as to what the purpose of the stand-up is leads to quite a lot of contention. If you can first agree to that purpose, you can then go to what Pam says and say, hey, you know what? This could be an email. We're now efficient.
One of the points you touched on is very important, right? As a manager, you are probably in too many meetings and you want to cut down. But for the dev team, also remember that a lot of folks are working remotely now, right? And that one point of communication where everyone gets on, maybe shows their faces and talks, is sort of the one social aspect that they are interfacing with all day. So maybe it holds more value than just the content that is shared. There's another, angle to it as well, and that connection as feeling like a team.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I also think we didn't cover like the follow-up from a meeting, the habit of going from meeting to meeting. And I know, Balin, you said you have the 30 minutes after the meeting for the actual work product from the meeting. But, there's different types of people that run meetings. And I think that when you have a meeting, not having someone say, okay, these are the items that we need to take away. These are our next steps. Here's your Confluence page. This is where you need to document everything. I think so often a lot of that is missed, and making sure that you're not ending with, we're going to follow up with that. And then it never gets followed up, of making sure that you're putting those items together to create those next steps.
I think that the focus can really help with that, and keeping the agenda narrow and not falling into the trap, which often happens, of like, tangents are great, right? You can go off on a tangent, you can collaborate, and that's where some good ideas happen. You have to be free flowing. You have to be able to do that, be it with developers and with stakeholders. But sometimes the tangent leads to, I said this, capture it in this meeting that has nothing to do with that task, and make sure we don't lose it. And it's like, wait a minute. Now you're putting all of your thought, you're trying to externalize your way of thinking into a bunch of, I guess, other people's meetings that really aren't related to it. So if you can keep that focus narrow, you can then kind of get everyone to collaborate on one thing, and then you can write it down and maybe have a work product at the end of it.
I was gonna say, I think it's helpful when we're trying to get good outcomes from a meeting, and also when we're determining whether or not we need a meeting and when, is to follow I guess it's called the Eisenhower matrix, where we're talking about importance versus urgency and where does it fall. I think there's so many times where something is urgent, but really not all that important or relevant, or vice versa, and we handle it the wrong way, right? If something's important and urgent, obviously we need to do it immediately. That's the easiest one, but sometimes something can be really important, but not urgent, and it's probably not relevant to the current conversation. Or something might be urgent, and even though it's not relevant, we need to just kind of get it out of the way, have a quick conversation, and move on. And I think sometimes those get muddled. And if you can kind of keep track of where it falls in that matrix, it can be more powerful.
That's a great point, and that applies to other types of meetings as well. Say, for example, a discovery meeting where we're trying to figure out requirements. Come to the meeting with some rubric, some way of organizing the chaos that comes out of collaboration. If it's the Eisenhower matrix for that type of thing, great. If it's the product thinking design intake process as we're trying to figure out key deliverables, great. If it's data flow management as we're trying to figure out how we're going to implement something and architect a system, all of those are different meetings with different folks. But the thing that's common amongst those three examples, the people running the meeting come with a rubric. They offer a way to organize the chaos. If we don't have that, it's just a bunch of people talking.
Yeah,
like
ideally.
a podcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry.
At the end of this, we need to summarize our to-dos and what are our key takeaways here.
We didn't have our AI companion on.
Oh no, I didn't know how to turn it on.
I would say in going this route and trying to avoid meetings and try to do async, don't go too far where you're not being efficient anymore. And so if the emails or Slack messages are going back and forth continuously with no resolution, just pick up the phone or get on
Have
a
a
meeting,
meeting.
and just get it solved, right? For example, when I'm chatting with customer service, I chat with them because it's async and I can continue doing what I want to do. And sometimes those conversations go on for more than 30 minutes. As they ask me a question, I ask a question. And speaking of tangents, the number of times the chat people have closed the conversation on me because I got distracted and I didn't respond within the 2 minutes that they give available, and then have to redo it all over again because they can't reference my previous conversation. Come on. So back to the main point.
Ask for my
it's like-
email above.
Yeah. And so sometimes you might feel you're saving time by doing async, but you're actually taking more time away from yourself because you're focusing on multiple things now, and you still have some mental capacity thread that's dedicated to replying to these async messages, right? So maybe just synchronize it, discuss it, get it out of the way, and then move on to the next thing that you can really focus on.
Thanks for connecting with us today. If you have a complex software problem that needs solving, thoughts on what we discussed today, or ideas on what topics we should tackle next, feel free to reach out to us at podcast@experoinc.com or on Twitter @experoinc. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for joining us, and we look forward to connecting with you next time.
Are we
I don't
gonna have
know
a follow-up to this so we can discuss what we talked about?
Since
Yeah.
you
Well, I
had
have
the biggest
another meeting
tangent.
right after this, so
Ooh,
it'll
okay.
get done at some point.
Is your meeting strictly a lunch meeting?
Oh, I have meetings with my food all day long.
I was gonna say every meeting
It's
is
like
a
every meeting is a
food
day
meeting.
with Kareem's food.
I have a question for you guys. How come you can drink a drink, but you can't food a food?
Ooh,
Ew.
Hmm.
that's some Kareem level shower
Um,
thoughts right there.
Yep, you're welcome. I thought I'd throw one in there.
I'm gonna
Why
food
aren't
up that
buildings
burger.
called built?
I can't even. I don't even have one.
Shipping in a truck and cargo on a ship.
That's a pretty good one. I like that.
Keep on trucking.